The Washington Commanders with a new quarterback in town in Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz making his return to the NFC East division, where he was formerly a quarterback for the Eagles last season, a quarterback for the Colts, and now he's making his way to the Commanders on his third team. So, how do you think Carson Wentz is going to fare out this year? Do you think he's going to have a great year, or do you think he's going to have a mediocre year, or do you think it's going to be another downfall year, a disastrous year for him? And do you think Ron Rivera can really turn this team around and finally get them to a winning record? Well, let's take a look and see what their schedule is like. It's your boy James here, and we're going to take a look at the Washington Commanders schedule. Let's take a look and see what they've got. So here we go. We got the Washington Commanders starting in week 1 at home in Washington with their new team name, and they go to face the Jacksonville Jaguars. This can be a really interesting game, I think, with a former coach of the Eagles and Doug Peterson with the Jaguars and a former quarterback for the Eagles and Carson Wentz. It's going to be really interesting to really see how this really pans out for the two people in Peterson, the coach, and Wentz as the player. I can see this game really going either way, but at the end of the day, I think Washington's defense is much stronger than Jacksonville's offensive line, which is really going to make the difference in this game and between these two teams. So, and I think Carson Wentz really can have a pretty good, solid opening game against the Jaguars. I know last year everyone is down on him when he lost to them last year at home at the end of the season, but that wasn't entirely all his fault, though, too. That offense for the Colts last year just sold him out, as well as the defense. But I think this year, with a new team, with some more help, I think that offensive line for the Washington Commanders is actually much more improved, and it's kind of underrated than people think. And with some help there, too, with Terry McLaurin and Adam Humphries, and a pretty good running game, too, with Antonio Gibson, I think this is a decent start for the Washington Commanders. I think they do take this win at home. They're playing at home. I think Ron Rivera is a very good coach, but I think this is going to be his last chance to really turn this team around and get them to probably even get into the playoffs, or maybe even have to win the division to even make it there. So I'm going with the Commanders to win that game. Then in week 2, they travel to play Detroit and with the Detroit Lions. I think the Detroit Lions are very feisty, sneaky. I think they can improve this year, but are they going to be able to improve with playing against the Washington team? I'm not sure. I think this Washington defense is pretty strong. It's not anywhere as good as it was 2 seasons ago, but it's definitely improved from last year. The defense last year was kind of all over the place in terms of where Chase Young was. He was kind of injured here and there. So, but I think at the end of the day, I do give the advantage to the Commanders to beat Detroit on the road. I think, really, to be quite honest with you, it's really tough for anybody really to go on the road and play in Detroit. I think Detroit's kind of a tough place to play with that atmosphere. But with right now in that defense in Washington, I think is pretty strong. I'm not sure how Jared Goff is going to be able to handle against that defense, as we've seen before. Usually with a good pass rushing defense, usually Jared Goff does struggle. And I think he does struggle with the Washington Commanders when he does go to play them. So I'm going to take the Washington Commanders to win that game. Then in week 3, the Eagles go to play the Washington. This is a revenge game for Carson Wentz, his old former team that he is playing against. I do think the Eagles are, on paper, I think they do have a better offense, but I think the defense is what really does concern most people like myself. If you're a football follower, I don't know how good that defense for Philly is this year. I don't know if they're going to be, I don't know if they're really going to be able to stop a lot of the run. I think that was their biggest struggle last year, was stopping the run, and even in their pass rush too, they couldn't really stop anybody from scoring on them, which is not very good, especially if you are a Washington Commander player that can take advantage of that. But I think the offense with Jalen Hurts and company, I think they are able to do some things with Washington that will prevent Carson Wentz to make some mistakes with this Washington team now on his new team. So I actually am going to pick the Eagles too. They might even split with the Commanders this year. I think the Eagles do win on the road in Washington. I just have that feeling that because of Jalen Hurts and company and what this team is, what they have on offense, I'm not really sure how well the Washington defense is going to be able to hold up on this team. So I'm going to take the Eagles to win that game in week 3. Then in week 4, they traveled to Dallas to play the Dallas Cowboys. I think the Dallas Cowboys are just a far superior team. That's not really saying much in this division because it's not a great division per se. But I do think the Cowboys do get their win against the Washington team this year. I just don't. I don't really see that game really being any close. I think the only thing that's the Cowboys are going to have to really be concerned about is that improved Washington defensive line, which I don't know. I don't really think Dak is really going to have too much of a problem with that. But I think he is going to have a closer game than people think. So, but I think the Dallas Cowboys do win that game at home against Washington. And then the Tennessee Titans travel to Washington to play the Commanders. I think that the Titans are a better team overall in terms of their defense and their offense too. I think a lot of their offense is used by Derrick Henry and company, which is going to wear down a lot of defenses this year. So, and I think that will end up happening to Washington. I think they're going to get too wrapped up in trying to stop the run, and I think it's going to tire out the defensive line as well. So I'm going to take the Titans to win that game in Washington. And then in week 6, it's a Thursday night football game between the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears. This is a really interesting game because both teams that don't really have a whole lot this year, I can see either one of these teams winning this game. I think the Chicago Bears' weaknesses is really mostly on that offense and their offensive line. And I think this Washington defense can really hold up on that. I think they can take advantage of the fact that Chicago does not have a very good offensive line to protect Justin Fields. So I can definitely see that being the case. But on the other flip side of things, I don't know how Carson Wentz is going to do against this Chicago defense. The Chicago defense has gotten worse, but sometimes when they do figure out like when a quarterback does get erratic under pressure and they know they can get the pressure under that quarterback, because we've seen it before. We've seen it with Jared Goff and company and all those guys. I think the Bears can find a way to win that game, especially since it's at home and it's very hard to play in Soldier Field. It's a tough place to play. The Chicago crowd is really rowdy. So I think really, in all honesty, I think Chicago does find some kind of sneaky way with their coaching staff and ability on defense to force some turnovers and put pressure on Carson Wentz and can beat the Commanders at home. Then you go week 7, you have the Green Bay Packers that go into Washington. Now, in all honesty, if it was in Green Bay, I think Green Bay would definitely blow this team out of the water, only because it's Aaron Rodgers. You just don't really bet against him at home. But I think this game is going to be a lot closer than people really think. I think last year was a bit of a struggle last year when these two teams did play with one another. It was a closer game than people thought it would have been. And now that Washington has upgraded their quarterback to Carson Wentz, which really isn't that big of an upgrade from Taylor Heinicke, to be quite honest with you. But I do think what's really going to struggle for Green Bay this year is that is being able to be able to get the ball off in time. I think Green Bay always has a good offensive line, but I think this Washington Commanders team has every opportunity to be able to slow down Aaron Rodgers, be able to slow down the run game in Aaron Jones. Where they could find that opportunity to beat the Packers. But because it's Aaron Rodgers, no matter who's out there on the field, no matter what kind of receivers he has, even without Devontae Adams, which was really his number one receiver rather, I still think Aaron Rodgers and company is still going to win some games to really be ahead of that division, and they're going to really have to be. And the reasoning behind that is mostly going to be because of the Minnesota Vikings that are probably going to be very good this year as well. So, but I think I think if there's any team in that division that they're playing this year in the NFC North that they could beat, I think it's both the Lions, and I do think they do have a good opportunity to beat Green Bay because it's at home. But I think I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers to win that one on the road. I think just I give him the slight advantage for whatever reason. I give him that slight advantage. I think that's just a good observation that I made. I think at home he plays good, and then on the road he plays even better. But I think, but I don't think this Washington defense is going to be able to get to Aaron Rodgers in time. So I'm going to take Green Bay to win that game on the road. And then in week 8, you've got Washington traveling to Indianapolis. This is another team that Carson Wentz is going to be wanting to get revenge on, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Colts are just a far uh, better team than the Commanders are in terms of their run game. I think Jonathan Taylor's a beast. He's going to run all over this team, and I think with the upgrade from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan definitely does help because I think Matt Ryan should be able to take advantage of this defense and the pass rush in Washington. And the Colts have a good offensive line, and I think they're one of the most underrated and best offensive lines in the league that could give some problems to Washington if they don't get after Matt Ryan. So I'm going to take the Colts to win that one. And then you're looking at week 9. You got the Vikings traveling to the Washington Commanders. This is an interesting game because it's Kirk Cousins going back home to his old team in Washington. This game I can honestly see either going either way. But I think the Vikings definitely do have the slighter edge of the stick here. And I'm saying that because they have more elite players in Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook will get that run game going. And and I think the offensive line for the Vikings is not really the strongest part of their offense. I think Kirk Cousins does a good enough job being able to get outside of the pocket when he needs to and releasing the ball when he really has to. And I think they can take advantage of the secondary as well in this. I think it's going to be very hard for any secondary to really cover Justin Jefferson. So I'm going to take the Vikings to win that one against Washington at home. So I'm going to take that as a win. And then the Washington Commanders go to Philly to play the Eagles on Monday night. I do think Washington can actually win in Philly. I know they've had some success there before. They're kind of similar to the Giants. I think they struggle mostly struggle. Excuse me, I can't speak. They mostly struggle at home, but they play well on the road. So I think this is going to be a good game for both teams, and I think Washington will get the better end of the Eagles this year. So I'm going to take Washington to avenge their early season loss to the Eagles and be able to beat them on the road on Monday Night Football. And then in week 11, you've got Washington traveling to the Houston Texans. I don't think the Houston Texans are really they don't really have anything that really scares you. I think really the only thing that they do have is that run game is pretty decent and Brandon Cooks. I think those are really the only things that really do scare you. But honestly, I think Carson Wentz is a slightly better quarterback than Davis Mills. And I think that defense for Washington is going to be too much for the Texans to handle, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on that quarterback. So I'm taking Washington to win that game in Houston. Then week 12, you've got the Atlanta Falcons traveling to Washington to play the Commanders. I take Washington. I don't have a lot of faith in the Atlanta Falcons this year. I don't think they're very good. They should be able to take advantage of that, whether it's Marcus Mariota or if it's Ritter that's playing at that point in the season. I don't know, but either quarterback that does play, it's not going to make any difference. I think Washington is just a better team than the Falcons. Then week 13, you've got the Washington Commanders going to New Jersey to play the Giants. I do have the Washington Commanders actually sweeping the Giants this year, so I am going to give them the advantage. They do play them in week 13. And then after that, you're looking at a 6-7 record for the Commanders. So that's really not a bad record going into the bye week. But you're running out of time too, and trying to make a playoff run or even actually winning the division here. So after the bye week, you've got the Giants again. I think the Washington Commanders do. I think this is the only team I believe that Washington can be able to sweep this year. And it's mostly going to be because of that defensive line. I think it's going to be very hard for the Giants to be able to cover Chase Young and Montez Sweat and all of them to really be able to beat again. So I think Washington's going to win those games. And then in week 16, you got the Commanders going to San Francisco to play the 49ers. The 49ers are they're kind of an iffy team this year. I think they can be good. And I think they're one of the sleeper teams in the NFC. But I think the biggest question mark really is going to rely on the quarterback play and if Deebo Samuel is going to be there. If neither one of those are figured out before the season starts, I think the 49ers are going to have some problems early on in the season and possibly all throughout, like even like this later part of the season. I think this is a pretty good matchup for both teams, though, because I think both defenses are very strong. I think they both kind of have a similar style of quarterback play, whether it's going to be Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo for the Niners and Carson Wentz as well. They both have a good run game going in. It's going to be very difficult for either. I think it's going to be very difficult to really decide which one of these two teams will win. But I think I'm going to go back to that game and decide once I get these other two games figured out. So I'm going to wait on that and see what happens here. And so we're going to take a look at week 17. You got the Cleveland Browns. I think Deshaun Watson's going to be playing at that point in the season. So I did take the Browns in my Browns prediction video. I do think they are going to beat Washington this year. I think because of Deshaun Watson. I think that quarterback play for Cleveland is going to make a difference in the second half of their season once Deshaun Watson gets out of suspension. So I do think the Browns do beat the Washington Commanders here. And then I see the Cowboys sweeping Washington this year. I think the Cowboys are just going to be too much for Washington to be able to handle. I don't know if they're really going to be able to catch up with the Cowboys. So it's going to be a very challenging year for them to beat the Cowboys. I mean, it could happen. They could split, but you never really know. But I think right now on paper, I don't really see them being able to split with the Cowboys this year. So then that kind of leaves us back to week 16. You have Washington at the San Francisco 49ers. Now, if it was Trey Lance that's starting for the 49ers, it could go really either way, to be quite honest with you. I can see the 49ers winning that. But I think with Trey Lance, there's still a lot of questions about him. We haven't really seen enough of him play yet. So that kind of does bring some questions into that factor. But if it's Jimmy G, you can either guarantee they're either going to win or lose because you know what you're going to get out of Jimmy Garoppolo. It's a tough game to really decide, but I think at the end of the day, I think Kyle Shanahan is just a slightly better coach, defensive mind coach than Ron Rivera is. So I think I'm going to take the 49ers to beat Washington at that time. So now we're going to take a look at the record, and they have a 7-10 record, which really isn't it's not terrible. It's definitely an improvement from last year. I think they're going to really, if they really do want to make the playoffs, if they do want to win their division, I think really what they're going to have to win mostly all of their division games this year. And that's going to be really challenging for them to do because of the Cowboys and the Eagles. They're both very questionable teams. And they're going to have to beat the Giants too if they want to make a playoff run. So it's going to be very tough for them to really do that. But I'm not going to say it can't be done because it definitely can be done. But we'll see where they are. We'll see how Carson Wentz does this year. I think I think this might be a better fit for him in Washington with Ron Rivera, who's a very good coach too in terms of quarterbacks. I think he can help this team be the best that they possibly can be. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. But they're really going to have to win some games this year if they really want to be in that conversation and being in the playoffs. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let me know what you think if Washington is going to be better. Do you think they'll be worse, or do you think they'll be around the same as last year? Let me know. And then for the next video, when we do the NFC East, we'll be doing the Philadelphia Eagles.